We talk about kings. But images of Christ have been difficult, really. Lots of people have attempted them. Many stained glass windows, like the one I have behind me here, depict Jesus, obviously as a man of his time, in robes, with long flowing hair and a beard, sometimes blonde, or brown haired. Very European, very classical. Some more modern pictures try and show him as rather Jewish, surprisingly enough. And even others try and shock us with a black Christ. But it's difficult, isn't it? How do you picture Christ? I mean, if you were like me, you were brought up with pictures of Jesus in the Bible with halos. I mean, there's a funny thing, isn't it? I don't know if you got confused with that. Did you think he was a spaceman wearing a space helmet? Or glowing with a little bit of, radioactivity? I don't know. So all these images are difficult to conjure with, but thinking about this, I came up with an image that I thought represented or looked... Oh, that's one. A little bit more like this king that turns things on his head. Not that I'm a gambling person, but I thought that was rather good. There's also another reason why I've chosen that particular king. I'm sure you can think about that one and guess that one, can't you? But anyway, so what does Christ look like? How about that? I thought that was rather charming, yes. Especially at this time coming up to Advent, we're reminded that this is how the king entered our world. Not with a crown, not with all the majesty or pomp and ceremony of a leader, but as the most precious and most vulnerable one amongst us, as a little baby just like that. And if you're a man like me, thank you, if you're agreeing with that, you'll think that most babies look alike. Sorry, girls. I know sort of grandmas and aunties will say, oh, look, he's got his father's ears and he's got his brother's nose and his mum's chin. And you think if they had an identical photograph in a crime scene, what would this person look like? But I'm afraid us chaps, most babies look similar, if not the same. Certainly not the same, but they look very similar. So I think an image of a baby is the closest we can really get when we see a baby of the image of Christ. What's remarkable also is that there's no power in this, no power of the throne or mink around the neck or a orb in his hand. But there is a power, isn't there, of a baby, a power of love, a power that you see that image and you're filled with love. So what does this Christ the King do with all his power? Well, there's a famous quote from John Emmerich who says, power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Great men are very often bad men. Almost always bad men is the exact quote, actually. Well, is that the case? Let's have a look at some of our earthly kings, shall we? So I'll come back to him. He's my favourite king. Most powerful king that Britain ever had, perhaps you could say. And what did he use that power for? Not to promote the London Underground, but as you can see, he challenged the most powerful person on the planet at that time, the Pope. He set aside the Church of Rome and had his own church, the Church of England. And what was he using this power for? He's using this power purely to get a son and heir to his throne. He was prepared to marry again, and again, and again, and again, for that ends. Now, we as Christians are often criticised for not being very scientific, but I've done a scientific analysis of this. I averaged out that the average family of his time was 8 children, somewhere between 6 and 14. 8. He married 6 times, 6 8s, 48, so he should have had 48 children, and if you divide that evenly, to keep it simple, between boys and girls, you end up with 50-50, 24. 24 sons and heirs he should have had. How many did he have? So much for his power. His power over life and death is some of the things that were always said about kings of old. Yes, they did have the power to send people on a one-way trip, to have their heads chopped off. But once they were dead, that's where his power ended. No power on earth has power over life and death. No king or emperor. Once you're dead, you're dead. Except Christ. Christ the King. His power goes beyond death. So this power, what does it look like? It sort of looks like a pyramid, doesn't it, power? You have the king at the top, or in this case, I think, this is a sort of French Revolution, so I don't know who they got at the top there, but there's people supporting the king. You know, the build-up, us plebs down at the bottom doing all our work to keep these people rich and famous, and then it goes up and up and up till you get to the ultimate chap on the top sitting on there with all that power. Well, God has a habit of turning things upside down, a bit like my king of hearts. So perhaps God's power looks a bit more like this. He's just asking about the consent form. Apparently there's some issue with it. I don't know. An upside down pyramid. Oh, I've done it again. Sorry about that. Well, perhaps a bit more like this. This is God's pyramid of power. He puts himself at the bottom. He puts himself right down beneath us and holding us all in his hands. All of us. Imagine that going on and on and on. Focusing down on this one power. So God's power was absolute. Is absolute. But this upside down power, this upside down kingdom, this upside down king, it looks ridiculous, doesn't it? Absolutely ridiculous. And Paul was aware of this. He wrote to encourage the Ephesians. We heard it in our reading. And I just want to quote a little bit of it. He was trying to encourage them to see this upside downness, this servant king, and to serve him. Even though they were surrounded by rich and powerful people, and they saw the world, the real world, like we do now, that other way round, where they're at the top and we're serving them. Let's see what he says. Let's just want to pull one tiny little bit out about what he says. Not only is Christ the King, he says he's far above all rule and authority and power and dominion, and above every name that is named, not only in this age, but in the age to come. So, where are we now? I've lost my place. No, I haven't. There we go. Here we go. Now, we've had power. We're talking about power. So, what do we use power for? Now, earlier I said they had the power of life and death. Well, yes, kings do. And how do they exercise that power? They exercise it with judgment. And they could judge whether someone lived or died. We heard in our readings about Jesus judging. And we have the image of him as a shepherd, meek and mild, leading his flock. That's one image of a shepherd. Let's just take you through what we've heard this morning about the other image of a shepherd. In Psalm 95, I just want to pull out, it says here, "For he is our God, and we are his people of his pasture, and the sheep of his hand. Oh, that today you would listen to his voice." Now that psalm read it earlier, full of peace and joy and comfort. And then like a sting in the towel, you get this little bit at the end. Oh, that today you would listen to his voice. I'll come back to that. Then we have Ezekiel. The Old Testament reading for the day is from Ezekiel 34. And this is where the Bible introduces rams and goats. And then Ezekiel talks about judging between sheep and sheep. And then we have him judging goats and sheep. Little fellas like this. Now, I know you guys, being Kiwis, know the difference between sheep and goats, don't you? Question mark over what that is. Well, Penny and I, when we lived in deepest, darkest Norfolk, way back when, we had a bit of grass, so we got some goats. We got Angora goats. And Angora goats need shearing. But before they need shearing, they get quite woolly, like a sheep. Yeah. And I always remember we had some work done next door, a farm next door. There was guys on the scaffold, so they were looking over our garden and they saw our goats. And they went, "Bear," as you do, you know, just to see if they got a reply. And they're a bit confused because they didn't get a bear back, like I do when I ever do it, of course, because I know how to talk sheep. It's one of the foreign languages I've picked up. But of course, they weren't sheep. They were goats. And when they were sheared, they looked very much more like goats, and the baaing from next door stopped rather embarrassingly. So let's go to a little bit further forward and look at what Jesus said in Matthew 20. We had that New Testament reading. We had Jesus coming in his glory, it says, and he has his good sheep on the right. Hello, good sheep. Then he has this lot, the goats on the left. Damned, aren't you? You're damned. I had a little lady in church, one of the churches I went to, and she always sat on this side of the church. And she said to me, "I always sit that side." I said, "Oh dear, I'm not with that. I don't want to be a goat." I think she was taking it a bit too literally, but you know. But truly, she always sat on this side. So I'll come and come with you guys, because you're sheep and you're blessed, aren't you? In that reading, we heard what Jesus was saying about the blessed ones. And I just want to pull out verse 37. This is where we get this reaction from the sheep, the good people. Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when was it we saw you hungry and gave you food? Or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" They were surprised that Jesus had recognized them. What about the reaction on this side? They're surprised, but not quite the same, is it? No. Their surprise has turned to defence straight away. "What? Us? That wasn't us. When? What? What are you talking about?" You can almost hear it. And I'm sure there's a translation in the Bible that actually says, "We didn't do anything." And I'm sure as parents we've heard that when we've gone into a room and there's a child with a mess. "I didn't do anything." Innocent. Just the point Jesus was making, wasn't it? Exactly the point. You didn't do anything. You cared. You didn't care. You served. You waited to be served. That's the judgment that Jesus was making. Oh, that today you would listen to his voice. There's some urgency there, isn't there? We often have this image of Jesus going back to images of the shepherd with his flock. But the other side of the coin, I give it to you, is this shepherd sorting the sheep from the goats. The fat sheep from the lean sheep. The caring from the non-caring. So where does that bring us? 4 minutes. When I was at school, a few years ago, well, perhaps more than a few years ago, I was given an essay to write, well, the class was, it wasn't just me, they weren't just picking on me, on 4 minutes to live. Because when I grew up, Britain was in the Cold War, and we were told that if there was a nuclear attack, we would get a 4-minute warning. Great. 4 minutes. To oblivion. No escape, just 4 minutes. So the essay was, what would you do in that 4 minutes? In your last 4 minutes, what would you do? I wasn't going to run that for 4 minutes, don't worry. I'm not that cruel. It's a chilling thought, isn't it? It's a chilling thought. Christ said to his followers, I'm not going to give you a 4-minute warning. In fact, I don't even know the time or the hour, but I will come back and I will judge. Seems a bit unfair not to be given a warning, but I put it to you, we've been given this generation, nearly 2,000 years warning of this judgment. And we even know the content of that judgment. It's about caring and serving. So I just want to wrap up with sharing my recent birthday with you and a card that I received. There you go, I've got a picture of it in this one. You see, not all my friends are God-fearing Christian folk. Some of them think a little bit blasphemous. And is that a word? Blasphemous? Oh, Simon's nodding, he thinks that's a word, thank you. I thought I'd made it up. Oh well. So we have, Jesus is coming, look busy. Well, perhaps if we consider that Jesus is the King, and he is going to judge, we don't want to just look busy, we want to be busy. Busy caring for the thirsty and the hungry, the stranger, the naked, the sick, and those imprisoned. You see, Jesus wants us to be just like him. He wants us to be kings. Kings like him. Upside down kings. Servant kings.